Welcome to General Conference Conversations, where we have conversations about General Conference. I'm your host, Kaylin, and I'm super excited to be here with you studying the words of Christ's chosen leaders. I hope you enjoy. Hello, and welcome back to General Conference Conversations. Sorry, I just cracked myself up right before I hit record. Because I realized that I'm recording in the basement and I don't need to be. But we're here already and I have everything set up, so we're not going to switch. Because I was like, it's not a good idea for me to wear a short sleeve shirt because it's cold down here. And then I realized that I don't need to be recording down here anyway. But it's okay because I'm not going to move. Anyway, welcome back. As I said last time, we are now in the Saturday evening session, and you get an extra episode this week because still get an extra one on Saturday because I was sick, and so I had to finish the Saturday afternoon session a few weeks late. But I wanted to try and stay on track so that it finishes. So I finished the podcast like a month before next conference, so that those who are preparing for next conference kind of have my whole catalog of videos if they want to use them. So today we're starting with Bishop Caussé. I hope I say that right. If not, I'm so sorry because I don't speak French. He is very French. And I love Bishop Caussé. So when I was a missionary during COVID, so back up. When you're in the MTC, you have Sunday night devotionals and Tuesday night devotionals. So you all gather in the big auditorium. Sundays were usually musical devotionals, at least when I was there. So like the week before Easter or the week of Easter, we did, we had a singing troupe come and sing The Lamb of God by Rob Gardner, which is how I introduced to Rob Gardner, and it made me really happy because I love Rob Gardner. But on Tuesdays we'd have general authorities come. So we had, I'm trying to remember who all we talked. I know Elwyn Clayton came with his wife. I think I only had two. I can't remember who else talked to us. Anyway, so when COVID hit and everybody was doing home MTC, they couldn't do that obviously in person because nobody was at the MTC. And so they started doing them, like recording them and putting them on our missionary portals. So we had a thing that we would, as missionaries, we had our emails for our mission president. And like we would get information from the mission department through our missionary portals. And so they started putting this up. So once a week, all the missionaries in the whole world got to watch the MTC devotionals, which is actually really nice because one, it gave us something to do, and like, because we didn't know what we were doing at first. So it kind of gave us an hour to like chill. We would write, like we would take notes, or we were doing a service project in one of my areas. We were making hats on like the looms. So we would take the looms home with us and we would do the hat looms while we were watching, which was really, really nice. And so anyway, so one of the people who talked was Bishop Caussé. And I don't remember all that he talked about because it's been years. But I remember it became a really big thing. I'm sure it was something like be all in and like work your hardest, because that was our mission president's really big thing, was like be all in, be 100% in. And I just remember he talked about that devotional a lot. And so I have like connections, like those people that came and talked. We had or like Elder Ballard came in, I guess President Ballard came to our mission. Elder Piper, Elder McKay came to our mission, Elder Suarez. So like there are people general authorities that I've met that like when they speak in general conference, I'm like, oh, I like them. Like I know them. I know them. I've met them. I've shook their hand. So it gives that like little extra thrill of like, oh, I love Bishop Caussé, or I love Elder McKay. He's awesome. And I really, really loved this talk. This was such a good talk. And I know I say that about like all the talks, but this one, I remember a lot about it, which is impressive. For me, for a lot of like conference, there are things where I remember, like I've said a lot, I remember phrases. I remember general themes. I'm like, oh, they talked about that a lot in conference this year. But I remember a lot of his talk for a lot of reasons, and I'll kind of get into that. But it's called Our Earthly Stewardship. It's the very first talk in the Saturday evening session. And as usual, I encourage you to listen to or read this talk yourself before you come listen to me think about it and think out loud about it and ramble about it, so you can get some of your own inspirations and direction from the Spirit, and maybe I can add to that or ask a question you may not think about. So he talks, most of this, obviously it's called Our Earthly Stewardship, so he's talking all about our role and our responsibility to take care of the world and also to take care of the people in the world. So it's kind of heavy, but it's also amazing. So he starts talking about he and his wife visited their native country of France. They're from France, and they went to Giverny. Again, I don't speak French, so please don't judge. And they went to, which is where Claude Monet had his water lilies. And so they were able to go and walk around his water lilies, which is he has a massive collection of hundreds of paintings directly inspired by this garden that he cultivated of the water lilies. So it's kind of his hook, right? Of like, oh, we went and saw the water lilies. So he says, brothers and sisters, our interactions with the beauties of nature around us can produce some of the most inspiring and delightful experiences in life. The emotions we feel kindle within us a deep sense of gratitude for our Heavenly Father and His Son, Jesus Christ, who created this magnificent earth with its mountains and streams, plants and animals, and our first parents, Adam and Eve. The work of creation is not an end in itself. It is an integral part of God's plan for His children. Its purpose is to provide the setting in which men and women may be tested, exercise their agency, find joy, and learn and progress so that they may one day return to the presence of their Creator and inherit eternal life. And I've always thought this, not always, I remember as a missionary, I served in Mesa, Arizona, and just east of Mesa is the Superstition Mountains. And there's one mountain range that's very famous, has the middle peak is Flatiron Peak. So if you look up pictures, maybe I'll put a picture up. I'll remind myself to put a picture here, of the Superstition Mountains. Was just, every time I drove in that direction, and I served out there, I served out east, not too far east, in Apache Junction, which is very close to the mountains. They are my mountains. Like, I loved seeing them. I loved watching them. I loved them at sunset. The sun would hit them and they were like pink. And it was just, I love the mountains. I grew up in Colorado, and then we moved to Illinois when I was 10, which has no mountains whatsoever. It's all flat. And so I have just this very deep love for mountains. Just like the magnificence and obviously Illinois has its beauty too, but there's something about mountains that is always they're just awe-inspiring. And right now I also live like 20 minutes from mountains, which is great. I can see them in the distance. There's just something about that. I remember thinking one day I was with my companion and we were driving east, straight at the mountains, and I could see them. And I remember just saying, like, God could have put us on the most boring planet in the world. He could have set us on a flat surface with just grass or just dirt. And instead he gave us mountains, and he gave us flowers, and he gave us lakes and streams and animals and birds, and he gave us a beautiful place to live. And I think about that when they talk about like the celestial, the terrestrial, and the telestial world, and like, but all of those glories are going to be more than you can possibly imagine, more than the world right now. I'm like, how can anything be more glorious than this? And that just blows my mortal mind that there are some things in the celestial kingdom and even the celestial kingdom that are more glorious than mountains, that are more glorious than water lilies, that are more glorious than lilacs, which are my favorite flower. And just shows how much God loves us and cares for us, and how much he loves beauty and just things, and not beauty as in like, oh, you're beautiful, but just like, just color and diversity. And, you know, we weren't just put on a flat earth in Minecraft. We were given the, like, I think about that. I don't know if any of you play Minecraft. I'll explain that for a second. So when you're playing Minecraft, when you're in creative mode, you go in and you can create things. You can build buildings and trees and whatever, right? And so you can either choose to have a flat earth, or I can't remember what the other one is called right now. The flat earth is literally all just grass, flat as far as the eye can see. And then the other one, I can't remember what it's called right now. It creates a world for you. So there's like mountains and trees and animals, and sometimes there's even like villages and people are living in them, and so you get to build around whatever has been built for you, well, what all already exists. And so it's really fun because it's kind of spontaneous. Like, you don't get to really choose like, oh, I want a mountain range and I want a forest. You get in there and you explore. And so I think about that sometimes. I'm like, God could have put us on a flat earth with flat grass as far as the eye could see, but instead he gave us a dynamic, beautiful mountains and trees and rivers and streams and the ocean. And as Bishop Caussé points out, it's not an end in itself. Creation was not the end. Creation was the beginning. Like, we get to keep creating, and we get to keep seeing creation happen in front of us, and it's the background for setting for us to be tested and exercise our agency and find joy and all of that beautifulness, right? Just amazing. I love God. I love my Heavenly Father. So he then goes on to say, however, the divine gift of the creation does not come without duties and responsibilities. These duties are best described by the concept of stewardship. In gospel terms, the word stewardship designates a sacred, spiritual, or temporal responsibility to take care of something that belongs to God, for which we are accountable. And so that kind of is the basis of his whole thing. And so he has 3 principles. First principle: the entire earth, including all life thereon, belongs to God. As stewards of God. Second, as stewards of God's creations, we have a duty to honor and care for them. And third, we are invited to participate in the work of creation. So the first principle is pretty straightforward, that everything on earth belongs to God, and we're kind of just using it, right? He's given it to us to use and to enjoy and to use as tools to go through this life. The second is also pretty straightforward. We're stewards of God's creations. We are caretakers and guardians of his animals and the earth that he's given us. So this is kind of a longer quote, but I think it's powerful, so I'm gonna read all of it. He says, beyond being simply a scientific or political necessity, the care of the earth and of our natural environment is a sacred responsibility entrusted to us by God, which should fill us with a deep sense of duty and humility. It is also an integral component of our discipleship. How can we honor and love Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ without honoring and loving their creations? There are many things that we can do, collectively and individually, to be good stewards. Considering our individual circumstances, each of us can use the bountiful resources of the earth more reverently and prudently. We can support community efforts to care for the earth. We can adopt personal lifestyles and behaviors that respect God's creations and make our own living spaces tidier, more beautiful, and more inspirational. Our stewardship over God's creation also includes, at its pinnacle, a sacred duty to love, respect, and care for all human beings with whom we share the earth. They are sons and daughters of God, our sisters and our brothers, and their eternal happiness is the very purpose of the work of creation. So, there's a lot to unpack in there, so I'm going to try and go slowly. Make sure that I can corral all of my thoughts. So, I had a thought in the very first paragraph and I can't think of it. So there's something about taking care of our planet that has become very political, right? Climate change, recycling, being green, being whatever. And it is often put to the individual to fix all of it. Oh, if you just recycle, then it'll all be better. Or if you use your water sparingly, whatever. But there are a lot of ways to take care of the earth that don't seem so overwhelming, right? There was something that I thought of when I was reading that paragraph. Anyway, so I'll go to the next one. So he says, considering individual circumstances, each of us can use the bountiful resources of the earth more reverently and prudently. And I love this because not all of us can go out and stop people from dumping things in the ocean, right? Like that is sometimes it's so overwhelming when we think about pollution or we think about the things that we're doing to not respect the planet that we were given. You know, how am I, person living in the middle of nowhere, how am I supposed to stop an oil company from dumping things? Or how am I supposed to stop this company from polluting the air? How am I supposed to? I can't, right? I personally cannot do anything. Showing up at their work site is not going to do much except maybe get me arrested. And so it can seem really big, and so compartmentalizing it and narrowing it down to like, oh, I can recycle. Which is obviously a good thing, right? Please recycle. But also it's not all up to us individually. And so I like that he talks about collectively and individually and considering our individual circumstances. So that's my first question is like, what can you do in your life to be a steward of the earth? And it's going to look different for everybody. If you live in an apartment building in the middle of the city, you're probably not going to be able to plant a garden. But if you live in the middle of nowhere, or you have a bigger yard, maybe you can plant some tomatoes and you can cultivate the earth that way. Maybe you don't have an accessible means of recycling. When I was growing up, or when we moved to Illinois, we had in town, there was a recycling plant, and so we would collect all our recycling and we'd take it into town. Place closed. And we live in a tiny town in the middle of nowhere. And so taking our recycling somewhere would be like a 20 to 40 minute drive. I actually don't know where the closest recycling plant would be anymore. And so it just did not make sense for us to drive 20 to 40 minutes to take our recycling somewhere. And so we don't really recycle anymore. Here in our town, they don't pick up recycling. And so we have to take it somewhere as well. When we lived in BC, they picked up recycling. So Monday was trash day and Thursday was recycling or something like that. Also, I live in Canada, so they buy back bottles. So you pay like 10 or 20 extra cents for a bottle. So if you buy like a plastic water bottle, you pay 10 extra cents. And then if you take it back to the bottle depot, they pay you that money back for recycling, and then they recycle those products. That's also, you have to take it to a bottle depot. They don't just come pick it up and then leave money at your door. And to some people that just doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't work that way. Also, you think about like clothes. There's a lot of plastic in clothes. And so sustainably, you know, not buying what they call fast fashion, things from like Walmart or Target or Superstore that are made very cheaply because it's all plastic. But me, I can't afford to go and buy a $100 dress that's pure cotton. Even though I know that would last me a while, I don't have the means to do that. And so like, sometimes it's just not possible for your personal situation. But what are things that you can do? These are some of the things that I thought about. Voting for policies that support taking care of the earth, whatever that looks like to you, your like personal opinion on things like that. Also in the country that you live and all of that jazz. So voting for things like that, or voting for people who are trying to help the earth. Living sustainably in the ways that you can. We compost, we try to recycle, and it's not as effective because going to the recycling plant is time consuming. But living sustainably in the ways that you can, whatever that looks like. And just learning about how your life impacts the world. I had no idea that there was plastic in clothing until I started watching YouTubers who make historically accurate clothing and wear historical clothing, and they like to wear like pure cotton. Like, they don't like fast fashion because their profession, they appreciate and understand the work and things that go into a piece of clothing. And I didn't realize that that's how that worked. There's not much I can do about that right now. Like I said, I can't afford to buy sustainably clothing. I can go to thrift stores and buy used clothing instead of new clothing. That's sustainable. And so, but just learning those little things, learning how your life impacts the world and how us as people are impacting the world. It can get overwhelming. It can get really terrifying and sad. But even just having that understanding and knowledge that maybe one day you're going to have that opportunity to be like, okay, I'm going to vote for this thing, or now I'm in the position where I can live this way. Or I really want to plant a garden right now, so I'm going to plant a garden right now. It really is an individual thing. But it is important to take care of the beautiful earth that God gave us. And also just appreciating the earth, taking pictures and telling people and showing people, like, I think that's also an important thing. And that last part, which I probably should have read separately because it's kind of its own thing, is part of our stewardship also includes human beings. That we are also the creation of God, right? We are also part of God's creation. And so, and they are sons and daughters of God. And so we also have responsibility for taking care of the physical and spiritual and mental needs of people around us. Of course, that doesn't mean that we are their only source of anything, right? We're not there to control them or be dependent on completely. But we are supposed to take care of people. He says, love, respect, and care for all human beings with whom we share the earth. And then he points this out which I really love. He says, "My brothers and sisters, should we not be the gardeners for our fellow men and women? Are we not our brother's keeper? Jesus commanded us to love our neighbors as ourselves." From his mouth, the word neighbor does not merely mean geographic proximity. It implies the proximity of the heart. It encompasses all the inhabitants of this planet, whether they live near us or in a faraway country, regardless of their origins, personal backgrounds, or circumstances. I think I've talked about this video before, but there's one of the videos that plays between sessions of conference, or they talk to little kids, and they ask them about like, oh, what did it look like when Jesus was baptized, or like, what is baptism? It's like really simple questions, and their answers are always so sweet and pure and simple. And one of the questions was, who is your neighbor? And most of the kids were like, oh, the people who live next to us or across the street. And there was one kid who, very matter-of-factly, he was like, well, actually, our neighbors are everybody. Really, our neighbors are just everybody that we come in contact with. And he said it like so factually that you could just tell his parents had been like, actually, our neighbors are kind of everybody. Like, you could just see like his like brain being like, well, yeah, our neighbors are people that we live next to, and so we should be kind to our neighbors, but just anybody that we come in contact with. And it was just really sweet. And so I also love that when they're like, obviously our neighbors are important, and they're people that we usually come in most contact with because we live literally right next door. But literally anybody that we see on the street, anybody that we know, our family, my family lives thousands of miles away. My best friend lives thousands of miles away. I have friends in different countries. I have friends in different states. And, you know, they're also, my responsibility responsibility is not the right word, but like I have a responsibility to also take care of them and to be kind and to love them from afar. Okay, find my next spot. So then the third principle was that we are invited to participate in the work of creation. And I'm going to read his quote because he sums it up very well in a way that I probably couldn't. We participate in the work of creation whenever we cultivate the earth or add our own constructions to this world, as long as we show respect for God's creations. Our contributions may be expressed through the creation of works of art, architecture, music, literature, and culture, which embellish our planet, quicken our senses, and brighten our lives. We also contribute through scientific and medical discoveries that preserve the earth and life upon it. President Thomas S. Monson summarized this concept with these beautiful words: God left the world unfinished for man to work his skill upon, that man might know the joys and glories of creation. I think that fits so well into our understanding of the plan of salvation, right? That this place, as he said earlier, it's not an end. Creation was the beginning. That we also get to participate in the joy of creation, in planting plants and in having children, which he talks about a little bit later, and also just adding to the world. That we're making music and we're putting our ideas and our love into the world. That we are creators. No matter what you do, you are a creator. Like, even if you're not in the creative arts, like what we usually refer to as the creative arts, you're creating things. You're creating things every day. You're creating relationships. You're adding to the world. And we are practicing to become God. We're practicing to, my blanket's coming apart. We're practicing for one day becoming like him. We're trying to become like God, right? And so I also just love that little quote at the end for President Monson of God left the world unfinished for man to work his skill upon, that he might know the joys and glories of creation. It's just a really sweet thing. And then also, so I love this word that he uses, and I've loved this word for a long time, and it made me so happy that it was used in general conference. He is specifically talking about procreation in this specific section of his talk. He's talking about like procreation, of having children, that God also gave us not just the ability to like plant plants, but also to create life, which is amazing. I'll talk about this again when I talk about our further reading, but now I'm gonna say it so I remind myself. If you've never read President Holland, oh my word, Elder Holland gave a BYU speech years and years ago called Souls, Symbols, Sacraments. And I'll put that in my further reading as well. But he talks all about that, about like the power of creation and why it's so important that we have the law of chastity, because God gave us this amazing power, and really the only safeguards that he put on it are self-control and like things like that. But yeah, but anyway, now I put the wrong timestamp. He says, among all of man's achievements, none can equal the experience of becoming co-creators with God. And he's specifically talking again about having children and raising children, because that is what God is doing, right? We really become like God as parents, the parental side of God, that we are literally creating, that we are trying our best to be good parents, just as God is. But I really love the word co-creators. So I follow somebody on Instagram. We talked about this a lot, specifically with manifesting. And I've always been kind of weird about manifesting because I don't know, it just feels strange personally to me, just because it doesn't work in my brain. Like, it just doesn't, like, so manifesting is like, basically you think something and it's going to happen to you. Like, you believe that something's going to happen, it's going to happen. And so it's kind of like the basics of it. I know there's more to manifesting, and so if you're into manifesting, please don't like be offended that I'm not doing it correctly, because I don't completely understand the whole like world of manifesting, right? But there's something in that that's kind of missing for me, is that work part of it. That like, yes, I can believe that I'm going to, I don't know, hit 200 subscribers on YouTube, for example, which is not really one of my goals, but that's as an example. I can believe that's going to happen. I can manifest that. I can put it on my wall and look at it every day. But if I don't work towards that, how's that going to happen? Like, I can be like, okay, I want to get 200 YouTube subscriptions, and then just not post anymore and be like, oh, I'm manifesting it, it's going to happen. And so I think that sometimes personally how it comes across to me is this like, well, I've manifested it, so it's going to happen. And it also goes the other way of like, well, you're not manifesting hard enough, so you manifested something but it didn't happen, so you're not doing it right. And so that becomes kind of judgmental. It comes across judgmental to me. Anyway, but she's very into manifesting, but she calls it co-creating with God. That it's not just sticking something up on a wall and looking at it and saying, I want that to happen. That you are working with God, with your personal revelation, with your own goals and whatever, because God, he wants what you want. The things that are important to you are important to him. And so it's a collaboration. Collaboration's a good word. It's collab, right? You're collaborating with God. You're co-creating with God. And so obviously he's talking here about literal creation, procreation, literally making a child. But I think it also applies to everything else he talked about architecture and art and music. I'm a writer. I write books. I don't have anything published, so don't ask. Maybe eventually one day. But I definitely, I don't like pray every time I go to write, but I definitely know that my talent for writing and the work that I've put into it come from God. That's something that he gave me, that he wants me to use. Words are my paintbrush. I also draw, but I'm not very good at drawing, so I'm working on it. But words are my paintbrush. Words are so important to me, and And that came from God. My linguistic capabilities came from God, but also I've worked on it. I've written books and like short stories since I was in like 7th grade. It's been 20 years? No, I'm 24. How old are you when you're in 7th grade? I was 12, 13. I was 13 when I was in 7th grade. So it's been 10 years, 11 years that I've been writing stories. I wasn't good at the beginning, but I've gotten better. And I've learned from other people, and I've put the work in. But I do think that there was something in my DNA, in whatever God wanted me to do with my life, has to do with words and has to do with inspiring people with my words. Whether they're something like this about the gospel and about Christ and bearing my testimony of Christ, or it's about writing a fiction book that has nothing to do with the church at all. I shouldn't say that everything has to do with the gospel, but like, I'm not writing books about members of the church, usually. So that's my second question, is how can you be a co-creator with God in your life? And you might already be doing that. I think it's just the different wording that I think is important. Because seeking personal revelation is co-creating with God. Like looking at your talents and your abilities, your spiritual gifts, and using them, that's co-creating with God. How can you do that? How can you look at it just a little bit differently and be like, oh, I am a creator in this world. Even as I said that you don't have anything to do with art, like writing or poetry or whatever, you're still creating in this world. You're creating a life with God. So how can you do that? How do you look at that differently? How does co-creating with God, how does that phrase make you think about your life a little bit different? So, so you have two little things at the end here. He says, my brothers and sisters, we should recognize that all is spiritual to the Lord, including the most temporal aspects of our lives. And then a little bit later he says, at the end of this mortal existence, the Master will ask us to give an account for our sacred stewardship, including how we have cared for his creations. I think those kind of just sum it all up, right? That everything is spiritual to the Lord, even the most temporal things. As he said, he created everything spiritually and then temporally, right? That everything matters to him. It's not like, obviously our spirituality is very important, but our jobs and our day-to-day activities are important to him. Our achievements are important to him. And at the end of our day, when we stand before him and make an accounting of our life here, one of the things he's going to ask is how we were a steward over his creations. And that includes ourselves. We are his creations as well. So that's all I wanted to talk about with his talk specifically. He talks about a few other things in here that obviously, please read the rest of it, because those are just little snippets, and there were so many other good quotes that I could have used, but I'm already at almost 40 minutes again, so my questions were, how can you, I'm not gonna get it completely correct, what can you do in your life to be a steward of the earth? And then how can you be a co-creator with God in your life? Those are my two questions to think about. And then further study, he refers to the parable of the talents in Matthew 25. So that would be a good one to look at. In Quest of an Abundant Life by President Monson. I believe that's where that quote comes from him. That's a March 1988 Ensign article. We have a whole gospel topics entry about environmental stewardship and conservation, which I did not know about until it came up in one of the footnotes. I think these are really cool. And then The Creation by President Nelson. It was an April 2000 General Conference talk. And then, I didn't realize this, probably because I'm young, they had a whole welfare session of the 1977 General Conference, and President Kimball, I believe he was President Kimball at the time, gave a talk called Welfare Services, the Gospel in Action, and I believe Bishop Caussé either references it, footnotes it, or quotes it in his talk. So that would also be interesting to look at if you are interested in that. And then I'll repeat, and I'll put this in the show notes and everything. It's called Souls, Symbols, Sacraments by Elder Holland. And it was a BYU speech. And I can't remember what year it was given in, but it's been like 10 or 15 years. It's an older one. It is so good. I should probably reread it. It's been a while since I read that talk, and it's just so good. Just everywhere in general. So yeah, I think that's kind of all I've got for you today, and I will see you guys on Saturday as well. I have one more episode this week to give you. So yeah, I'll talk to you later. Thank you so much for listening to and or watching this episode of General Conference Conversations. Be sure to like and follow and share us on Facebook and Instagram. And if you like the show, please subscribe or leave a review and tell your friends and family. Also, a quick reminder that there is a physical study guide to go along with these videos. You can find that link in the description. Until next time.